Welcome everyone to this month's installment of the Creation Justice webinars. This is a place where we focus on some of the most critical issues facing our world today so that we might not only grow in awareness, but also grow in action that makes love visible. My name is Andy Wells-Bean. I'm the Environmental Justice Fellow for the United Church of Christ. And I am joined by longtime Dynamo for Justice, Reverend Michael Malcom. Michael Malcom serves as Executive Director of Alabama Interfaith Power Light and the People's Justice Council. And then Michael, before I introduce our speaker, I would love to get your thoughts on framing our focus. So a lot has been happening in the climate world lately, especially since our last edition of this webinar. So congressional climate action seemed dead. So the president announced he would act. And then the Inflation Reduction Act and its billions for environmental justice, clean energy, EVs, and huge giveaways to the oil and gas sector. So this webinar is about where we should be looking for possible action against climate and environmental injustice. As seems to be our trend these days, the topic remains strategic in nature and spiritual in nature. So we are going to be talking about how we choose to make substantial commitments that relate to our deepest values and convictions. We are talking about decisions that fundamentally relate to faith, hope, and courage. So, Reverend Michael Malcom, what are your thoughts as we get started?
Andy, thank you for that setup. I also am appreciative, as always, to be co-hosting this long time program. Where we lift up voices of communities of faith, as well as voices of those who are often our least and left out. And as I rode through the Gulf South, as I made my journey from Alabama to New Orleans, and I sit here in New Orleans now, and I rode through seeing the various industrial polluting facilities that lie within the communities that I rode through. I saw the communities that also these industrial polluting facilities sit in. And I couldn't help but to think, it won't get any better for us. When we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, we see that there are provisions that benefit us as a whole universally in some of the reduction rates, the various investments in climate projects, green infrastructure. But at the same time, I have to wrestle with the cons that come with that, because those cons that come with that often sit in our communities and already sit in our communities. And the truth be told, they're not going to get any better. When we look at land leasing, it's happening in the Gulf South. When we look at the various carbon sequestration projects that they want to do, it's happening in the Gulf South. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is happening to the Appalachian Mountains, which is a part of the Gulf South. This is happening to us, and it's not getting any better according to this legislation. So when I hear my various allies shouting and celebrating the pros that exist within this legislation, and not advocating for us to do better about the cons in the House while we still have an opportunity, I have to wonder, do we really care about each other, or do we just care about a win? The reality is none of us got what we wanted out of this deal, but we still have an opportunity to do so. And if we can still center care in this moment, we should very much do so, because it's imminent that we do so. These are my words for this entire webinar. And this is my word not only for this webinar, but also for the People's Justice Council. And I can even say the countless of voices of those that I know and cherish within my beloved Gulf South. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you so much. And before I introduce our guest for today, I would be remiss If I didn't mention that we have Thaddeus Elliott from the UCC Washington, D.C. office with us today. It's always a pleasure to have him. He is in so many important conversations in and around our nation's capital, and he'll be sharing some insights at the very end of this call. So thank you so much for being with us, Thaddeus. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lynn Thorp. She is the National Campaigns Director for Clean Water Action. And Clean Water Action is a grassroots powerhouse nonprofit with members in all 50 states and a phone and door-to-door canvas that reaches huge numbers of Americans each year. I personally have taken part in those canvases and been canvassed myself. Lynn oversees Clean Water Action's national work on water, global warming, and energy and chemical policy. She's particularly involved with drinking water issues and has served 2 terms on the National Drinking Water Advisory Committee, which advises the US EPA. She also has served on a number of other federal advisory committees. So Lynn, thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'll pass things over to you.
Hi, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you in this webinar. As Andy mentioned, I direct our national work. Many of you may have run into our folks from our state offices in about 15 states where we conduct our work. And if so, I send their regards. My national team is a small, but we like to think mighty one. And a lot of our day-to-day work is, of course, about federal policy, which has real impacts in people's lives and in communities on the ground. Of course, we do a lot of work on water pollution and drinking water. Of course, that's the founding issue of our organization, Clean Water Action. But around the country and over the 50 years of work, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. We touched on all the gamut of environmental issues. Of course, climate change and clean energy issues. Toxic chemicals is a very important piece of our history and our work, as well as work on plastics and waste and all of those many questions, and of course, water. Even though our work is very focused at the federal level on some of the details of drinking water and water pollution, and I'll mention some of those to you today, we obviously care about this greatest threat to our life support system, climate change, and what it all means. So I'll speak about that Inflation Reduction Act, which is a bill with a number of key things in it around healthcare and other issues, but also climate, and then talk about a few of our other things. And we will watch the chat for any questions you may have and try to leave time for that. We're faced with that same dilemma that Reverend Malcom talked about when we look at this big bill that you're hearing about in the news. You know, it has historically unprecedented investments in addressing this climate crisis that threatens our life support system, our ability to live on this planet, as well as that of many of our wildlife friends. And we're pleased to see that these investments in helping people upgrade their homes to energy efficient homes, massive investment in helping our country make and do the things we need to have cleaner energy, including solar and wind, of course. And all of these things add up to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by possibly even more than 40% by 2030. That's big, and that's close to what the president has committed to, which is, I think, in the 52% range. And yet, as always, we see this outsized influence of polluters. In my work on water, we see this constantly, you know, but the outsized influence of the fossil fuel industry, oil and gas in particular, I think now, is one that we have struggled with in everything I've ever worked on. And we see it here as well. And we noted that in the statement we put out on Monday about the bill. Even with also some and I think some good investments that try to help some of the communities that we've neglected for so long and allowed to be the victims of things like the fossil fuel industry. There's $27 billion in there for low-cost financing for clean energy investments in disadvantaged communities. That's good. That mirrors some commitments the administration has made, but it doesn't change the fact that there's some incentives in this bill for some of the negative and really not even helpful technologies. I think Reverend Malcom mentioned some of the carbon sequestration schemes are less than useful. While we might someday think it's useful to get some of that carbon stocked away somewhere, that's not what's going on with these proposed projects. We intend to keep on these. The only hope, I look for hope always, and one of the hopeful things I've noticed in this bill that I'll share with you, and our analysis is far from complete, is that a lot of these investments that get us the greenhouse gas reductions are real. It's real money, and it's things that will happen. People will want these investments in communities, in homes, in industries. That some of the things that are given away to the oil and gas industry, they're not definite. We can fight them, and we're going to have to keep doing that. I'm not saying that to say it makes it okay. I'm saying that when I struggle for that ray of sunshine, that's where I see it. You know, some of these leases, they want to do it drilling and for oil and gas on public lands. My whole career, these people want more leases all the time, especially on our public lands, our lands. And yet they never end up doing the activity. It's a strange way the oil and gas industry is incentivized to say they can do drilling that they don't always do, or that people like you and me stop them. So we will not have our job finished by any means. If this bill were to be signed as written right now, we will continue those struggles we have, not only for sometimes a federal way to block bad projects, but as you all know so well, our work on the ground in our own communities to keep blocking the bad things and supporting the good things. And that's just where I try to find my ray of hope. So while I will always be the kind of person who says, oh, look for ways to influence our federal government, tell Congress what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, push the president, push the Environmental Protection Agency and the other federal agencies. We know that so much of this also in the end plays out at the state level, where you live, where we live, and in our cities and towns. So that's where we have been. So this fairly fast moving thing is to say that we are pleased to see these investments in addressing climate change, but we are going to keep fighting to both remove the provisions that incentivize fossil fuel projects, that perpetuate our reliance on them, but also their outsized influence, to fight that, but that we will do that going forward as well, no matter what happens.
Maybe
ahead,
before we move on to other topics that are not as closely focused on the IRA, Reverend Michael Malcom, do you want to weigh in about what research you've heard about digging into what's actually in that bill and the reaction from frontline and fence line communities?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just dropped the link in the chat concerning the investments for frontline communities, and there's some double counting that has taken place within that, and it shows that there's a discrepancy of about $12.5 billion worth of double counting that's been accredited to EJ communities, or the benefits going to EJ communities, but that's not accurate. And so that in itself is problematic, that we're really touting this as being some savior for EJ communities when EJ communities aren't saying that for themselves. I have an issue with our big green groups somehow pitching over the wall once again and not including EJ communities in the conversation in the first place, because a lot of those provisions shouldn't find themselves in a climate bill. And I really, really am taken aback, if I be honest with you all, to see fossil fuel industry embracing this along with our big green groups and wondering what in the world has happened when this is something that we're supposed to be coming against. It really speaks of a bigger issue, a much larger issue. At what point do we stop compromising over lives? At what point do we stop compromising over the life of a planet and of a people and of a non-people, but still have life? At what point do we stop the compromise and we start looking at really being that civic agent for saving life? And at what point do we stop praising mediocrity? And truth be told, if I look at this bill, I see it as a mediocre bill that we shouldn't be praising, but we should be looking at as a launching pad and a launching pad only. And again, we still have an opportunity to do more in the House with amendments, but we aren't pushing for it at all because it seems to me that we're chasing the wind. And it's baffling to me, and it's really heartbreaking when I see my allies who I've talked to and I fought with to get some of these things done, celebrating the fact that some of these things that we really wanted to have happen didn't happen. And the things that we did have happen have shackled to them things that also destroy us, particularly, again, those in the South, in the Gulf South at that.
Yeah, thank you for articulating that. And as somebody who currently resides on the Gulf Coast, I'm personally sensitive to the demand from in this bill to expand oil and gas drilling in the Gulf and elsewhere. And Lynn, maybe you can add some perspective about what might be coming next and what options are on the table to continue to move towards more environmental and climate justice.
Yeah, I will talk about some other issues, but I wanted to say too, I did want to reflect on how do we get to this place that certain industries have such outsized influence. And I don't want to say the oil and gas are the only ones like this, but it's big, and it does have to do with some of it. Not all of it has to do with that outsized influence on our politics, which has been true all my life, but that some of the ways we allow financing of political campaigns, as you all know, and I know you've had briefings on this too, has got to change. The so-called dark money and all of that, we think, has made oil and gas influence in particular worse. One of my colleagues did a few reports a few years ago to show political contributions from oil and gas to just federal elected officials, and it was rather frightening. And then he dug deeper to try to connect the contributions to the outcomes of specific things that Congress was dealing with, and you could really see that line. And that, I'm not saying that's our only problem, but it's one that is so apparent to me in this situation. I'm just checking the chat to make sure I haven't missed anything. So I was going to share a little bit about some water issues and all, but I don't want to, Andy or Reverend Malcom, I didn't want to cut this conversation shorter. So I will keep watching the chat for more comments on this question. You had asked at the beginning about some of the things we could also all be watching for, to advance cleaner water, healthier communities, questions of addressing injustice. So I wanted to say one thing about a different thing going on in Congress, which is the Environmental Justice for All Act. And we have, I know you all have been engaged in that, as have we. And I wanted to mention that that bill, which is a comprehensive effort to address some of the root causes of the disproportionate impact that we see in communities, and indeed some of the things that play in the problems we see in this Inflation Reduction Act or the so-called Climate and Health and Tax Bill. I think the Environmental Justice for All Act is a really creative and interesting way to start trying to tackle that in a big way, in a comprehensive way. The House Natural Resources Committee, where that bill has been brought up and born, had a hearing a couple of weeks ago, and they are now looking to move the bill. We aren't sure quite what will happen, but I know Clean Water Action and many of the organizations you all know are a part of and work with have action alerts on their websites where you can tell your members of Congress, particularly in the U.S. House of Representatives, to support the Environmental Justice for All Act. And I hope you'll take a look at that. Like I said, I know some of you have been working on this bill, but just one example would be trying to codify the executive order on environmental justice. There's the 1994 version from President Clinton. President Biden has done some updating of that, but to update that even further and codify it into law and to put into place mechanisms that make it more real. We haven't used those executive orders the way we could to stop bad permits, bad projects in communities around the country. Another example I'll give you is one that's really very difficult when you get into the world of policy and regulation, which is how do we think about one, let's say a water pollution problem, water pollution being put out by one factory, when you can't look at that pollution just on its own. You have to consider the total impact of other pollution in that community. We talk about that, the technical term is cumulative impact. We keep addressing these problems that affect our health and our community's well-being as if they're each one thing. But as you all know, well, from any problem, like a problem with your roof on your house, problems build up on top of each other. Harm builds up on top of itself. And so we have to have a way in our environmental regulations and decisions that we make to consider the multiple harms that some people face in their communities. It could be water pollution, it could be air pollution, or both, and from all different sources. And how do we think about that when we say, oh, it's okay to build that facility or to let out that pollution? It's hard. The scientists and engineers don't even know quite how to think about this, but we need to make it part of the way we think about protecting our air, our water, our land, so that we can figure that out and embed it in our regulatory and legal processes. So that's just one extremely big thing the Environmental Justice Act would try to improve. So I hope you all will continue to support that and the pieces of that and these very important changes we need to make. Sometimes when we talk about the US Congress, because of the way politics works and the undue influence of powerful special interests on elected officials, it can get discouraging. I certainly feel that way sometimes. I do feel that it's important to share some of the optimism we continue to feel about this administration and some of the commitments they've made, which doesn't mean we don't have to push them all the time to do better and to fulfill their promises. But we do see some promising things and opportunities to push for more. on the administration side, so in the federal agencies that the president directs to do all the work. And for us and my work, Clean Water Action's work is usually focused on the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, which implements all of our environmental laws. And that, for my work, of course, is very much about the Clean Water Act, which tries to stop water pollution, and the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is about the water coming out of the tap. Those are connected, as you know, and we're especially interested in where some of the problems we have in tap water come from pollution that is not controlled where it should be controlled, right? Where it starts and that then leads to health problems in our drinking water. You know, not everything's about what your water utility is doing. A lot of those problems start way further up. I'll just share with you one example where we're looking forward to engaging more and more in the next couple of years. You all have heard of the famous PFAS chemicals, PFAS. You certainly see them in the news. PFAS chemicals are a long, complicated story, but they are thousands of chemicals that are in everything we have, everything we do. Those people have slipped those chemicals just into about everything. And we see PFAS chemical contamination in water and land and air all over the country and in our bodies. There's a lot of activity around it right now, and that's a good thing. And there's a lot of focus on PFAS in drinking water, which is very important, and we need to get it out of there. But you know, a lot of that, well, all of that, those chemicals, which some people call them forever chemicals because they last a long time and they build up in our bodies or in the environment. And they are linked to very many health effects on many parts of our bodies, cancer and reproductive effects and immune system effects, which we have learned so much more about living through this pandemic together, how important our immune system is. And but one thing that's moving finally, and this administration is making some slow steps, is to use that powerful Clean Water Act, our nation's water pollution law, to try to get at these PFAS chemicals and say, we don't just want to treat them out of the drinking water. We want to stop them getting in that river in the first place that is your drinking water source. That is a hard process, and it gets very technical and it's slow, but my colleagues at Clean Water Action are really working on both the federal level and the state level to get those water pollution laws put to work on PFAS chemicals. And watch for that, because I think there will be opportunities to push President Biden and the EPA to move faster. They don't need Congress to act. They have this authority. We just have to decide to use it. And of course, chemical manufacturers are very powerful. And when you're dealing with the manufacturers of products and the sellers of just about everything, it's a lot, but they have to change and they know it. We have an optimistic campaign right now that we're involved with people around the country to get REI. REI is the company that many of you will know for selling, you know, outdoor stuff and camping stuff and all kinds of other products, clothing and equipment for outdoor activities. And REI did commit to get some PFAS chemicals out of some of their products, but they're a leading company and we need them to go faster to get all PFAS chemicals out of all of their products. And that's a hard job. We like what those PFAS chemicals can do, making your tent more waterproof, but you know, we have to stop that. And so we're urging REI to make a strong commitment to get PFAS out of all of their products. And we're excited about that because we know that they're a company that has been a leader in things like this, getting toxic chemicals out of their projects, and we need them to lead here. Such a big company can also influence how products are made around the country and the world. So that's a little bit of optimism for you there, that people and consumer power really can help with a campaign like that. Also, like I said, we feel that we can push the president and EPA to start being more serious about getting these PFAS chemicals out of our lives. Not just leaving it to you and me to pay for in our drinking water bill. And then I just will mention quickly, another long time project for us is working on lead in drinking water. That's a different kind of problem. You know, we can't really blame a polluter as we do. There's so many of our water problems and should. Lead comes from the pipes we chose to put in the ground, the ones that come from the big water main in the middle of the road into your building. They're usually a home, a smaller building. And we need, it's just as simple as this. We need to get those lead pipes out of the ground. And you know, there's a lot of interest in that around the country. I'm sure you've heard about it. That infrastructure funding that Congress and the administration were able to get last year is investing $15 billion or more in getting these lead pipes out. That's good. There are other ways communities can finance getting those pipes out, but EPA is once again, for the second time in just a few years, going to take a harder look at the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations that are meant to protect us from lead in drinking water, but that have a lot of shortcomings and a lot of flaws, and even some improvements that were made 2 years ago, finalized last year, are not all they need to be. And for Clean Water Action, the top priority there is getting a requirement that all water systems not only find those lead service lines that are giving us this most of this problem, but that they get rid of them and replace them. And we need a requirement for that. And we are urging EPA to go ahead and just make that decision. It's been our call for a very long time because of new money and because of increased understanding of how important it is to reduce any lead exposure that we can. We think we might be able to push the administration and EPA to do it this round. So please watch for that. You'll be hearing about it, not just from Clean Water Action, I'm sure, but lead service lines. We can do better. We really can put lead in drinking water behind us. And I will close by noting that while we, with many things, always want to see more, we have been encouraged and are engaging with the administration and the Environmental Protection Agency on their commitments to address environmental justice in the administration. I suspect you all have had briefings on the many aspects of that, including the Justice 40 program. But for us, it's important because Justice 40, which is an administration-wide commitment to make sure the benefits of environment and climate and energy programs and others go to disadvantaged communities. A lot of the number of the pilot projects that they're using to see if they can figure out how to make Justice 40 a government-wide program. They're water projects. So we are using water programs that we work on every day to try to demonstrate this possibility. It's difficult. It requires not only EPA, but everybody involved in things like drinking water and wastewater and water pollution programs to do differently, to behave differently and make different decisions. So we're engaged in that because of our long engagement in water and pollution and drinking water. We want to see that succeed. And I think we will see progress, but we will have times where we need to push the administration or push the EPA to make those commitments real.
Wonderful.
So that's just a little bit of what we've been up to, and I appreciate you all being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Lynn. I love the way you were able to touch on the IRA, touch on the Biden administration and what their commitments are, the PFAS and those forever chemicals and lead. You've got a full plate. So thank you for sharing that work. Before we open things up to some Q&A and folks can dig deeper into your expertise and your perspective, I want to circle back to Reverend Michael Malcom and see if you have any thoughts that you want to share about what Lynn has been sharing with us.
Yeah, actually, there was a question that was asked about NEPA and the Inflation
Mm,
Reduction Act,
mhm.
and asking about were there any changes um, to NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, and just to let people know that there was or is proposed changes. They are looking at streamlining NEPA, which makes it harder for communities, environmental justice communities, to fight, because that's one of the tools we use in the process of fighting against various building projects and other projects that will happen in our communities. So that does take that away. Want to be clear about that as well. Again, I need to emphasize, and I hope you all hear me, there's still time to make amendments, and we need to push our legislators to make those amendments while there's still time.
Great. Well, I see that we've got a couple messages in the Q&A already. So let's see, do we have, I'm skimming through these now. So Dems want us to get 2 more senators. Are we beholden to them, or should we be looking for a different political solution? That's a little outside of my purview, but maybe Lynn, you could tell us, if we did have 2 more Dem senators, what would things be different? Or are we forever chasing, a greater majority?
And when this is not my daily work, it's just my perspective. It's a good question. What if you got 2 more and you needed even more? Pardon me, there's noise out in my street. I have worked my career trying to be nonpartisan in some of my work, at least. I think I can say right now that there is one party that does things to try to protect the environment, not always as well as we'd like, as we have heard so well demonstrated today. And there's one party who does not. And so I do think that having a bigger majority of the party dedicated to governance right now in our history means better outcomes than what we see now. It's a simple mathematical question, but that is also, I bring to that my own perspective, and you all have seen the reports that while the federal government has many failings, I believe that the federal government is an important piece of the solution to solving pollution problems and other related problems. And one party right now wants to dismantle the federal government, and I can't support that. And it's not only because that's something I work on. So, is it the only thing we have to do? I'm sure not.
You know what, Lynn? I'd like to steer us away from the politics as much as possible. I don't think that's really our avenue and vehicle where we want to put our energies. But I do want to go back to this PFAS thing, because again, as one who's married to the South, I know that we are heavily under attack PFAS. But looking at PFAS and in particular talking with communities of faith who are more focused in this call, how do we as communities of faith get involved in a very substantial way, a very tangible way, against this fight against PFAS, because it is a forever chemical that we use in everything, and this forever chemical finds its way in our bodies.
Yeah, well, I mentioned a few things. I mean, I think there are certainly federal government things that EPA has a massive PFAS strategy where they're doing literally many dozens of things, that affect all the different pieces of their programs. And I think there are times where public engagement and public comment can help push them to do the right thing. I do think that there are other things that people can do in closer to home or closer to their own daily lives. I'm not, my work every day isn't always about things like that REI campaign I mentioned, but I think where we can push the sellers and makers of the products we use to stop using these chemicals, that's a really important avenue. I can name one. There are many organizations leading many efforts on this, but I'll just name one right here and stick it in the chat for those interested. Toxic Free Future, and I mention them because they're involved with all kinds of campaign activities around the country, and so you know, their website is a good start at looking at how might this involve, you know, in fact, my life. Where could I be powerful? It's such a big entangled project. You will find in wherever you live, everyone on this webinar, there's no question that your state has been looking at PFAS contamination, including in the water bodies in your state, and finding out if your local elected officials or state agencies and others are taking action there, and how you can support them and push them, I think is a good idea. It's happening all around the country.
That's great. I do want to get to another couple of these questions. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry. I think we've actually got a question in the chat for you. That would be more in line. Is there a Senate counterpart to the Environmental Justice for All Act, HR 2021? The House version has 103 co-sponsors and has worked its way through several committees. A very good sign, and a chance of getting it passed in this session of Congress. And Brother Thaddeus, you might want to even come in on this as well, because I know between the two of you all, y'all have a lot of expertise in that particular field.
Go ahead, Thaddeus. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, this was going to be in my action session because I track that legislation for our office very closely. Yes, there is a Senate counterpart bill. It's just not moving on that side. The House version is the one that passed out of committee. So it will be introduced to the House floor for a vote. We're looking, that's going to happen. I mean, Congress is going into recess after they vote on IRA, which is circle back to the comment in the chat. That is just going to go through, like, there's not going to be any, it's not going to be the same kind of votorama going on there. That's pretty much just going to sail through in the House because they're going to go on recess after the completion of that. So we're looking at environmental justice for all happening sometime in the fall. They want to move ahead, getting that through the House before midterms. So we've already drafted a letter in support to the committee on the UCC side, just waiting for finalizing and when to send that out. So we're going to be doing a big push because the House side is going to be the better chance of getting that piece of legislation uplifted and out. The odds of it passing through the Senate, to be honest, are highly unlikely. Like, it's probably not going to happen. But it is a great messaging bill, at least because it elevates the issue, it elevates environmental justice communities and the impacts, and it puts out different, you know, it's such a comprehensive bill. It's a bill that was crafted with impacted communities. So they've done listening tours over multiple years, gathering that input, and Representative Grijalva, who's the main sponsor, took those things and his amendments that he submitted in the markup to getting it through. Now, the challenge, I did watch the bill markup. The challenge is because it's a midterm, year, a lot of the pushback is around anything that impedes on oil and gas production because of the energy crisis and our reliance on fossil fuels. Gas prices are high, so they're running on anything that plays off of that. And so that's kind of the big pushback, like, well, we can't pass this because it would curb gas and oil production, and that's going to hit you in your pocket. So we have to think about the consumer-based messaging that happens a lot. So that's one thing. And then they're talking a lot about like economy and stuff. So we've been working on counter messaging that focuses on the long-term costs to the environment and community health, not just on a macro level, but on an individual level that outweighs the short-term economic profits. But yeah, it's pretty exciting time. And I think now with IRA and kind of securing the money, I know our other faith-based groups working in the environmental policy space, we're pivoting really towards environmental justice and pushing back and lifting up and fighting for those concerns that Reverend Michael brought up that are borne out as a consequence of the IRA as well.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you, Thaddeus. I think we've got one more question in the chat right now, and that's about strategies for responding to a hostile Supreme Court. Thaddeus, Reverend Michael Malcom, Lynn, how do we deal with the Supreme Court? Who's got the answer? Go ahead, Lynn. I'll let you. Let you go for it.
Yeah, there are long-term answers to that, and there's some politics there. I will tell one piece that is relevant to our work. As you know, you may have heard a major Clean Water Act case will be heard by the court in the fall, and it involves a question my organization has been involved with, well, either since the day we were founded or at least for the last 20 years. And every time I say it, I think it sounds funny, but what's the definition of water for the purpose of implementing the Clean Water Act? And why that matters is that powerful special interests have always wanted to limit which water bodies we protect. And the Clean Water Act, we think, and certainly our advocacy has said, no, all water is connected. You have to protect the small stream if you care about the big river. Everyone knows that all water is connected, but this is honestly the fight we're having. And you'll see it referred to as WOTUS, which is horrible, waters of the US. But we have joined a brief with hundreds of other organizations around the country, a brief to the Supreme Court saying that they should not limit the definition of what water we protect. And but we're quite concerned. We're quite concerned that not only could the decision lead to a bad decision for the Clean Water Act, but that it could have implications for other environmental laws. But we are able as an organization to be part of at least those legal arguments by supporting the attorneys who are doing this brief. And we'll continue to take every avenue. I mean, I think you all know that does become political pretty quick. Thaddeus, what else are you hearing? I don't know if you have any other ideas or gossip there.
Not really, it's the same. We're asking ourselves the same question, like, what do you do? I mean, the kind of like civics 101 answer is that you have to focus on the legislative process and like changing the law, especially when you have justices that are relying on the letter of the law as the justification for some of these decisions, because we've seen with the last round of decisions, a lot of them were based under the rationale that because the law does not specifically say this interpretation, you can't be free to interpret it. Again, that presents another challenge with the backlog in our legislative branch, how it's hard to get things passed, but that's why it's important, to kind of put on my Our Faith, Our Vote hat, that when we go to we stay engaged in our political process, because even though there are machinations and things that try to stack the chips against us, the people still have there's enough people who still have the access to the ballot, the ability to vote, who aren't exercising that right, who aren't staying as engaged as they could, that we could really make a difference. So we have to keep mindful and stay hopeful and know that we can still work that process, and knowing that, okay, we take the things that we believe in and that are values, and we find the candidates, regardless of whatever their party affiliation, they align with those values. And then if they say they align with those values and they go out and they don't deliver or act on those values, we have to hold them accountable to that and not just keep reelecting, you know, like that's just kind of the mindset we need to start getting in to get around, because we have 3 branches of government and they all check each other. So when you feel discouraged by one, like start looking at the others. And that's kind of how we operate here. It's like, if we're not getting anything through Congress, we look at the executive branch and what could happen there. Same thing with the judiciary. You just kind of have to circulate and adjust your strategies.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I'll add is that in addition to the legislature, we need to be calling on the president to do a heck of a lot more. He said when it looked like the climate bill was totally done, that he was going to take action. Well, we have legislation, but it is not nearly what we need to meet the climate and environmental justice crises. And the Center for Biological Diversity has put out a wonderful report detailing all the different powers that are within the president's authority if he declares a climate emergency. And so putting pressure on Congress to do their part, and then putting pressure on the Biden administration to do their part will be crucial while we deal with our current Supreme Court. And with that, I think that we're going to wrap up our Q&A. Maybe we can respond to any other questions in the chat there. And I want to pass things over to Lynn if she has any wrap-up comments for another 30 seconds before going to Reverend Michael Malcom for a closing prayer. But do stay on until you're done, to hear our action updates from Thaddeus after we close the webinar itself. Any final words?
My parting words are thank you so much for inviting me. I hope I've helped share some new information with all of you, but also I have also learned from each of you and from your approach to bringing faith to action here. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lynn. All right.
Brother Andy, let me first say thank you for doing such a wonderful job of filling in for Dr. Brooks. You made my job a whole lot easier, and I appreciate it.
That's very kind.
As always, Brother Thaddeus, it's always good to be with you, and we look forward to actions and next steps at the continuation of this call. Sister Lynn, thank you. Thank you very much for being with us and the words that you shared and those points of action for us to be able to get involved. And my prayer is that we will get involved. We'll get involved to not only celebrating the pros of this act, but also fighting against the cons that exist as well. Because again, if we only celebrate the pros and don't address the cons, we're just as unequal in our approach as this bill has been in its approach to saving us. Again, there should be no compromise when it comes down to saving life. Let us pray. God eternal, we thank you for this opportunity to come together and learn from one another, to share thought, to share passions, and to share drive. We pray that as we leave this place, we never leave your presence, that we understand that we are prophets of peace. We are prophets of care and compassion. God, help us in this moment to be such prophets that stand for justice, that stand for mercy, and walk lovingly with one another. Thank you for this program, and we ask that you would continue to strengthen it and build it. It is in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And now now we're officially done with this Creation Justice webinar, and I'd ask all of you to stick around for our supplement at the end from Thaddeus about what actions we can be taking over the next little while. I'll pass over to Thaddeus. And thank you again so much, Reverend Michael Malcom and Lynn Thorp. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, thank you, everyone. So much of my updates and actions I had were shared in the main session. So this will be brief. I won't keep you too long. So it's August, so we're going to August recess, which is our main recharge mode here in DC. A lot of us in our office have been rotating, going on vacation, and we'll do that over the next couple of weeks. So we don't have tons of new actions or things for you to do like right now, because Congress is kind of going off back to their districts and they're taking a break. So this is our time that we're really recalibrating and strategizing and getting ready to go into the fall campaign season. So we're updating our Faith Our Vote materials. So you'll have fresh issue area one-pagers with questions that you can ask candidates pertaining to environmental justice, criminal justice, you name it, we have it. I do have the link for our Faith Our Vote. I'll put that on. You can go to ourfaithourvote.org. You can sign up that way. There are also tools there that you can check your voter registration, your districts, if you don't know, particularly like your state level districts. Sometimes that kind of slips out of our notice, but it has everything, all the races, who's going up, one-stop shopping for that, all there. So that's the main thing. Get connected with our Faith Our Vote, start looking up, if there's still primaries coming up, make sure you're registered for your primary. For the main general election, voting laws have changed in various states, so check what's changed, check if there's any new processes for absentee ballots, and make sure you get all your ducks in a row before October, November, in case there's any issues. You don't want to be like caught in the last minute where your vote is not getting certified. So that's the main thing you can do right now. The IRA is going to be passed, which is a good thing because it gives us, the main benefit is it gives us resources to really address some of our macro level problems when it comes to reducing emissions. But the work now falls on, like Lynn said, making sure that those leases that they want to hand out often don't use, that they stay inactive, that we don't increase drilling in our Gulf, we don't increase drilling in Alaska. Also keeping in mind that the transition with renewables will also result in an increase in extraction activities when it comes to critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, nickel, all those kind of components of renewable batteries and other photovoltaic cells for solar and all of that stuff, making sure that we're still protecting frontline communities and we're taking into consideration the cumulative impacts from having a variety, if you have a trucking facility with a oil refinery, and then you want to add like another expressway or something through there as well. August recess is also a good time because members do go back to their districts and will be around in their district offices, that you can try to schedule a meeting with your representative while they're in district. That's a good way to have engagement there, to speak about the issues, to speak about the things going on in your community, sharing your stories. They really like having that interaction with their constituents and those examples to take back with them. So if you have the time or the ability to, I highly encourage you to set up one of those meetings. If you feel like you have a representative that's generally supportive and is doing a good job, it's always good to just send, have a good thanks for what you're doing, for fighting the good fight. Because it is very hard when we have these meetings with staffers on both sides of the aisle. We always take time to appreciate that their jobs are hard. They're not really bad people all the time, or like trying to actively make things harder for people. And I feel like they get a lot of flack sometimes that's unwarranted. So it's always good to use like that relational lobbying, as my colleague Katie calls it, to establish good relationships, to give them encouragement when they need it, but also pushback when they need it. And August is a good time to do that because they're just more accessible to you versus when they're here in Washington. Okay. And so, yeah, so keep a lookout. We'll update I'll drop the action alert for the EJ bill in there. Fortunately, all the key components that we liked in that bill made it through the markup process. Most of the amendments that were accepted were pretty minor. Some of them kind of expanded the definition of like what a community of color is. There were some that were a little concerning that were kind of trying to grandfather in certain extraction projects so that they wouldn't fall under any new NEPA review processes, or would open up an ability for communities to block that project going ahead. But overall, the bill in its amended form is one that we're still backing and supporting. And as we move into that phase, we'll definitely want to be doing messaging. We'll definitely want you sending in letters, making phone calls, tweeting at your representatives to really signal boost the legislation so that hopefully it does pass to the House. And if it makes it to the Senate, if it doesn't get through, it'll at least be another kind of motivating factor for those of us in the environmental space going into election season to get riled up and kind of motivated to stay in the fight. So yeah, so if anyone has any other questions about specific things, those are kind of the main things that we're working on now. We're also doing a campaign on regulatory action, so pushing the Biden administration to declare a climate emergency, but we're also pushing the EPA to expedite proposed rule changes that they have just to get it done now. Like, for example, the new clean car standards, adjusting that rule so that it includes car models year 2027 and beyond, so that once that rule's in, as companies are already working towards to be in compliance with it, if there are any administrative changes in the next presidential election cycle, the companies, car makers will already be kind of like on the end, leading end for that. As well as other agencies are releasing more to be in compliance with the Justice 40 initiative. They're developing programs, and so we're just trying to push them to get those programs up and running and kind of going down the road. So it's harder for those things to get reversed later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing these insights, and thank you for all your work, Thaddeus. I know that you are just out in so many meetings, keeping tabs on so many different moving pieces, and we so appreciate that work. I think that we can wrap things up unless there are any further questions in the that folks have. and we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much. It's been great to have you all. Thanks for joining us again.